Hello there guys, what is going on? This is the Darkest Timeline. I'm Daniel Childs, Arsenal 5, Chelsea 0. Going to be giving you my rational perspective on a night that historically is another absolutely woeful one in recent history. You have to go back to the 80s, I believe, for the last time Chelsea were beaten this heavily by a London rival. Arsenal had more shots against Chelsea than they ever have in a Premier League game as they did in that first half. Chelsea have now conceded their most amount of goals in a Premier League season. The only thing that Bowley and Clearlake have done successfully is failure. That is the only thing they've achieved in their time at Stamford Bridge so far. They have achieved significant failure, and it feels like at times that's kind of a mission consistently. I know it isn't, but you look at the scale, and it's almost comedic at times, the scale of failure. We're going to get into it because last night, I think Liam Toomey said this brilliantly in his post-match piece. It was surprising but not shocking. I don't think many of us before that game, especially when you saw that lineup, especially when you knew that Cole Palmer and Malo Gusto weren't going to be in the starting 11, we all feared that could have happened. I think when you see it play out in front of you, you still are a little bit surprised and you still are a little bit taken back that it's actually happening. This kind of nightmarish situation where Kai Havertz is scoring against you. It's an opponent that Chelsea have been bitter rivals with and at times overwhelmed. And given the sort of batterings, to them as they did to us last night. But I don't think any of us can honestly say we're shocked. How can you be? How can you be shocked that it's more misery piled on to a period in the club's history that has been mostly miserable to encounter? And again, I'll say this. No amount of gaslighting, no amount of being told you're spoiled or arrogant or entitled or being unreasonable should stop you from criticizing this current project, because the project has failed and the project needs to be ditched. The people who conjured that project, who have overseen that project, need to be held accountable. And it's not just Mauricio Pochettino. Mauricio Pochettino and the players is where we're going to start, because of course that's who was on the pitch in the dugout last night at the Emirates. But if you think that's where the buck needs to stop, we ain't getting anywhere as a club fast, because simply this is the failure on so many levels, and last night is reflective of the failures we have seen at Chelsea Football Club so consistently now. This is what Chelsea are, and until there is a course correction, I don't think much is going to improve. I think the first point is Mauricio Pochettino, for all we can look above him, for all we can look at injuries, for all we can say there are fundamental problems with the leadership and the decision-making of those who appointed him in the first place and problems that precede him. As a coach, I don't know how you survive after games like last night. The problem with last night was not only, as I say, it's the culmination of a lot of failure, but it's also the culmination of a lot of failure specific to Mauricio Pochettino this season. Defensively, we weren't as bad last season, and last season was tragic. But seriously, we have regressed massively defensively, and that has to be on the head coach. The goals conceded last night, the nature of the goals conceded last night. Very few of those goals last night were because of Arsenal genius. A lot of them were Chelsea disorganised, players not tracking runners structurally all over the place against one of the best teams in the Premier League. This all falls squarely at the head coach, and I don't want to hear about there's a lack of height, there's nothing Mauricio Pochettino could do. Accountability is something that has been lost at Chelsea Football Club across all levels, and unfortunately, I'm not going to hear that Mauricio Pochettino has no responsibility. He has nothing to do with last night, because as a coach, it is your responsibility, even in difficult circumstances, to construct a squad that can try to get a result. If you fall short like you did against Man City, I'm always going to have a lot more sympathy for Pochettino than I am last night, where Chelsea structurally was set up horrendously against a team that seemed capable of breaking us down on a consistent basis. All of the trademarks, the bad trademarks of Pochettino's Chelsea this season were on display. Tactical naivety, tactical disorganisation, players not being in a contained shape, us being hit on transition, the gaps between defence and midfield so stark that it was so easy for players of the quality of Declan Rice to run through on a consistent basis. Set pieces, us being disorganised, not being aware to one of the best teams in the league at set pieces. Again, where does the buck stop? And it has to stop in a variety of places, to be honest. But mainly after last night, I think that it's very difficult for Pochettino to survive, because no one can look at that and go, I'm going to have more of that next season. Pochettino, when he has performances last night, it's very hard to argue that he is the man to lead this team forward, because from a tactical point of view, is he up to date with the Premier League? Can he still compete at this level? That's a big question. Can he motivate these players enough to get a response? Could this group be doing better? I think that is a serious question. As much as we can look at the quality and the fragility, which we should do of this group of players, 5-0 away at Arsenal is not acceptable on any level. He needs to take responsibility. And if that means him not keeping his job, I'm not going to lose sleep. If he fails to get European football, I think he probably should lose his job, because that is the minimum requirement. Not even getting Europa Conference League when Chelsea have had it handed on a platter to them, really. When you look at the fact we have failed to beat the likes of Burnley and Sheffield United in recent weeks, along with really bad performances earlier in the season when we had arguably a better group of players to call upon, to be honest. So I don't want to hear that Pochettino has nothing to do with this failure. The players, I look across that team and I see the echoes of previous transfer windows that have gone horrendously wrong. Marc Cucurella was not helped out by Mykhailo Mudryk, but Marc Cucurella should be nowhere near a Chelsea team. Axel Disasi and Benoit Badiashile massively regressed. He gave the ball away consistently last night. Both of them are just not capable of performing in a Chelsea defence, maybe even a Premier League defence. I felt so sorry for Alfie Gilchrist in his first Premier League start, that he was so unprotected from a player like Noni Madueke, who, gives it a big one when he wants to take a penalty, but can't perform to the highest level when he has to defend properly. Simply inexcusable. Enzo Fernandez and Moises Caicedo, a 200, close to 300 million midfield, who cannot control for the life of them games. And again, you can look at Pochettino, but I look at individual players who simply have been average at best this season, from Caicedo and Enzo Fernandez's case. Mykhailo Mudryk is what Mykhailo Mudryk is. He's an incredibly flawed footballer, and he's an indictment on the current ownership, in the sense that they ploughed a lot of money in. And you look at that night, such a great reflection of the differences between both clubs, in the fact that Chelsea went all out to sign Mykhailo Mudryk. Maybe a little bit of an ego trip for them that they got him over Arsenal, who of course wanted Mudryk in that January window. Of course, Arsenal pivoted. They signed Trossard from Brighton, who at the time I was told wasn't good enough for Chelsea, and Trossard scored. Trossard has looked like a very good player for Arsenal. Mudryk looks so far away from being a competent footballer for Chelsea, it's frightening. And I've said this as well, when you let players like Callum Hudson-Odoi go because you think that Mudryk is the next big thing, but he's so far below the required level, it's very hard to justify decision making like that. The Jackson performance was quite similar to the Man City performance in a lot of ways. I think he ran the channel well in the first half, especially down the left. I think he did things that tried to get Chelsea up the pitch, but unfortunately that attacking and decision-making in the final third was so far lacking once again. I don't think Jackson was the worst player last night. I think he probably should have been sent off early, to be honest, and reckless from a player who was trying to avoid a booking and did so. Across the team, it's absolutely woeful. You can give those criticisms to individuals. You can give the criticism to Pochettino and believe he needs to be sacked. I'm not going to argue with you on that. But it comes back to who is above him, who constructed this squad, who makes the key decisions, who sacked Graham Potter, who sacked Thomas Tuchel, who made decisions in the transfer window over the last summer that we were going to go for this radical experiment of only signing players under the age of 25, and believe that this project was so worth persisting with that we were going to look over other players, potentially look over our own academy who could have provided instant impact like they have in recent years. It's mainly the sporting directors, because if Paul Winstanley and Lawrence Stewart are not dismissed along with Mauricio Pochettino, it's a complete waste of time. These two, along with others in the Chelsea Genius think tank, the Genius Bar of Chelsea transfers, who have been given so much power, have failed. They have failed on so many levels. They have failed to get Chelsea in a position where they can compete seriously, where they've been embarrassed in this way, where they've constructed a squad that looks so imbalanced, that looks so immature, that has a few bright spots, but simply unable to compete, especially when you factor in the amount spent. Chelsea have not spent peanuts on this squad. They have spent a large amount. They have let a lot of experience walk out the door under this ownership. You look at the squad for all its flaws in 2022, there's no argument. Chelsea would probably be in a better position. They may not gain Champions League football, but there's no way they're mid-table. There's no way they're getting embarrassed like this. And that squad had frustrations. That squad had limitations to it. But you cannot argue we would be in a worse place if we'd mainly kept the bulk of the squad that they took over in the summer of 2022. I think that is undeniable personally. And that is such a damning indictment on this current sporting director group, ownership, think tank, whatever you want to call it. It's been a mess and it's failed. And until those people are held accountable, I don't see anything majorly changing, because we've seen the patting themselves on the back interviews this season. We have seen the Chelsea Supporters Trust come out, look at the ownership and look at the decision makers at this club and say, supporters are concerned, supporters are frustrated, supporters are aggrieved with what they're seeing at the club. They think we're a laughingstock. And then to see a statement from Fab, who of course is in connection with the ownership, in consultation with the ownership, basically gaslight them and say those concerns were ludicrous to begin with. It's an insult. And it's why that gaslighting, it's why that dismissive nature to fans and going like that and trying to make out that it's fans' responsibility to understand this genius project, when actually it's your responsibility to put out a coherent squad to construct a club that is going to be consistently successful based on what you took over in 2022. Just be barely competent, and they have failed on all of that. The ownership, who are the key decision makers here, they said the sporting team, they said the sporting side of Chelsea was not majorly coherent. They have made it incoherent. Commercially, they talked about how wonderful they were going to be from a commercial aspect. We started this season, and I don't mind because I like the shirt with no sponsor, but we started this season without a sponsor. They still haven't announced a sponsor for next season. Chaotic on that. And then you look at the fan engagement side. They wanted to be pioneers. They have made Chelsea fans dislike their current club. There's no two ways about it. Fans are disconnected. Season ticket holders who love the club don't want to go to games anymore. Fans who would never leave the ground early were leaving the ground early last night because of how disgusted they were at that performance, at the shower of shambles that we have seen play out over the past 18 months. This is unacceptable. And until there is a wake-up call, until they stop patting themselves on the back and think that everything's perfect and it's just us idiots who can't see the grand project in front of us, that they will never communicate to us because apparently maybe we're not intelligent enough to hear it. But I personally feel that the club is so fundamentally broken. It doesn't even feel like a proper club. It feels like an ego exercise at this point. And so much fundamental change needs to happen that I feel like more embarrassments like last night will continue to happen. So those are my thoughts. This could be the final review of the season, because I do think Chelsea could respond as they have before this season. We get Cole Palmer back, we get Malo Gusto back, and maybe we do something at Aston Villa. But then it won't be long before the next embarrassment. There may be a response then. It won't be long before the next embarrassment, because when the script is so bad, a director, VFX, CGI, all of that cannot make up for the failure, because at a fundamental level, the system is not good enough. And it's putting Chelsea in a very dangerous place, because their failures in the transfer market have likely meant that Chelsea will not be able to rebuild and spend as much as they probably should do this summer to make up for those errors. And Chelsea could be hit with PSR sanctions. Chelsea could be in a position where they are firmly mid-table and they start having to sell the players they don't want to sell, the likes of Cole Palmer in upcoming years. That is the place they're in. And I think just trying to gaslight fans and tell fans they're being ridiculous for these concerns. How can you watch last night and think that is even remotely acceptable? How can you watch last night and think the club is moving in a positive direction? You can't. That's the reality. And until people face reality, until people at the club start holding those accountable, nothing, and I mean nothing, is going to change.